That's good.
Welcome everyone to season 3, episode 100 of the Premiere Pod. Yes, you heard that right. Episode 100. 100. I'm your host, Yash Pika, joined by my co-host, Tyler Chan. We had to make that a big deal because it is a very big deal. We actually have reached episode 100. And if you didn't know, on our debut episode of the Premiere Pod, which was on, I have the date right here, August 8th, 2018. And it is currently December 16th of 2020. And if I can do math, which I think I can do a little bit, that's a little over 2.5 years. Quite remarkable journey. I will say so myself. It's been really crazy to be thinking back the fact that we have done a soccer podcast about the Premier League for 2.5 years. And if you know anything about sports, a lot changes in a 2.5 year time span. I mean, Jose Mourinho was a manager at Manchester United when this happened. Liverpool have not even won a Premier League title at that point. So those are some of the sports stories, but we really wouldn't be in this position of continuously doing it if we didn't have, a fan base following us. So it's been a long journey, and we really want to thank everyone that has taken the time in those 2.5 years to listen to one of these episodes, or to glance at one of the episodes, or to even open up the podcasting app and just click on it, on one of our episodes. We really do appreciate it. I know we say it almost every episode, but when you reach episode 100, you kind of reflect and think, and we really do appreciate just all the support and just seeing the show slowly grow as the seasons have gone by and as the years have gone by of just doing it. So we really do appreciate it, and we just really say thank you. I'll throw it off to Tyler. So I know I had a long intro over there, but I'll throw it to Tyler.
That was perfect. For episode 100, we had no outline, no rundown or anything.
First time in God, that's probably the first. Well, I'll let Tyler, then we'll go back to that. But no outline for this episode.
Yeah, no outline, I guess, since episode 2.
Yeah.
Really, because every episode, we'll probably get into this a little later, but this one is just very unstructured. We're just going to kind of just talk from the heart, because we really just wanted to focus on just thanking everyone, and also kind of just reminiscing and going through the journey about how we've gone through all these first 100 episodes. We weren't thinking, I think completely honestly, that we'd be getting to 100 at one point.
Yeah.
We couldn't really picture it. We're just let's just do the podcast.
Doing it.
Yeah, let's just keep doing it. We'll just see where we get to. We don't know. And then here we are, and sure enough, we even have people listening to us. So that's even crazy to me to think about still, because in my head, I'm still thinking it's we're just two people from UGA just talking about sports, and then people are just kind of listening to us if they wanted to. And it's kind of worked out pretty cool. It's a lot. It's a lot to kind of take in right now at 100.
Yeah, it's very, very, very surreal feeling, because I know there have been, for me, there's been certain weeks, when the week has been really hard back when I was in school, whether it be a finals week or something, tests and projects were kind of ramping up, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And then sometimes you don't really have the full on energy to bring to the podcast, but that's when you have, a co-host like Tyler, when he's bringing the energy, it helps lift you up. And I'm sure I've done the same, where, I'm really into it. And then you could be having a down week where it's just you've been swamped with a lot of work and stuff like that. So it's good to have that, but it's also good to remember that, you have people that listen to your show almost every week and such. So you want to be able to provide some value to their lives. So, which is crazy that, there are people out there that, listen to us just talk in front of our microphones for 50 minutes to an hour each week, just about the newest storylines in the Premier League and such. So it's pretty crazy when you actually think about it.
Every episode is about 45 minutes to an hour. And I make this joke a lot, but now we're at the point where I believe you can probably just listen to our voices for 4 days straight now.
That's crazy. That's literally crazy.
You can drive across the US, take some rest stops and still listen to our voice nonstop. That's
you
mental.
literally could drive from Georgia all the way to the West Coast, Washington, and still have literally our podcast on the entire time you drive, and still have some podcasts to listen to afterwards.
There's no tangible kind of metric in terms of how much we've made for this pod, but I guess that's the closest we can get. Is our podcast could be stretched out across the entire U.S. if you just drove across it.
It's pretty cool, and it's also one thing that a lot of people have always said that they've liked about the show that I have friends with in sports media and such. They said like they really do appreciate how, I guess, consistent we are with doing the show, because I have like friends and such that have done podcasts, and sometimes, they'll go on long streaks of doing it and then it'll just drop off, and, you won't hear from the podcast again for like 2 months straight. And I just remember for this show, I always wanted to keep it some sort of consistency, whether that be every 2 weeks, at least a week, twice a week, or whatever. I just wanted to keep some sort of consistency going in, because I just remember a lot of YouTubers I follow, they always said that if you're going to start it, just be consistent with it, because if you get consistent, then you can start building some skills and get better at it. And I'm glad that we were able to keep it consistent. I know there have been times where we've taken like a couple weeks off, 3 weeks off, months off, like not months off, but a month off and such to kind of regather and such. But for the most part, in the thick of the season, I think we've done a pretty good job of, getting in each week to record and keeping the train rolling on the podcast.
Yeah. And as weird as it sounds, us doing this every week, at least for me, it's kind of like forcing a break in your week, just to kind of get away from everything, just to focus on just talking about the Premier League, talk about things that we enjoy outside of work. Just kind of, this is like our hobby. This is how we even met as friends in the first place. So
yeah, he's literally wearing a Liverpool jersey.
Yeah.
Not that one. I don't think it was that one, but it was I think it was the Warrior one or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Probably one of the Warrior ones. But this is my first Liverpool kit I ever had. And I got it when I was like in middle school, like in 7th or 8th grade. So it still fits, which is, I don't know if this is a good or bad thing. I haven't grown much since then. Or this was really big for me when I was younger, but
yeah, we'll go with that. We'll go with that storyline.
Yeah, I just bought it big, and then now it fit. But it's just, having this as a way for us to kind of consistently also kind of step away from whatever we're doing in our lives, and also just kind of getting into something we just want to talk about for fun, and then just have it be recorded. That's kind of like how we kind of think about it from the very high level, when you kind of just take away all the detail. It's just us two just talking for an hour about sports, and then other people listen about it.
Yeah, it's one thing that's also really cool is that it kind of gives you an excuse to reach out and like keep up with people, in a sense, because when you start working, for anyone that's in college and such, like I know it's very easy to kind of stay in touch with people when you're in school, because everyone's really close quartered and everyone's kind of hanging around doing the same thing. But when you start working, you really do get caught up with the work you're doing and interacting with your coworkers and such. So when you do get done with work, sometimes you find yourself really exhausted, and you kind of do your own little thing, whether that's playing video games, watching TV, working out. You just kind of go in your own little bubble and do your thing. And you sometimes lose a lot of connections and like that you had in college and such, because you just don't reach out to those people as often. But since I've had the podcast with Tyler, you're kind of forced into reaching out, and not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm saying it's a good thing, because it keeps like the friendship and stuff going, because you constantly have to do the episode each week, and what you hear is like what we record, but we oftentimes like we spend the first 30 minutes while in the lobby waiting to record. We'll just catch up a little bit, and then afterwards we'll go on like long tangents, sometimes talking about tech or anything that we find interesting or what's going on. So oftentimes we'll be talking for an hour, but really, I mean, it'll probably go for, if you're not even counting the recording time, sometimes it goes up to like 3 hours and such. So like this is like per week thing. So it's really cool when you like think about it.
Yeah. It's a weird way to keep accountability, to be social, and also just to keep this thing going. And also, as Jess was saying, I feel like the conversations we have before and after the recording of the podcast can be its own podcast at certain points. Where it's just like the after hours. Because it could be anything. It's just talking about tech, as you just mentioned, like maybe a certain pair of headphones, or just like a new MacBook or something like that, or it's just talking about something personal around like work, things like that. It can vary. It's just like literally a wild card, but it's just like, it's just two buds catching up, and then this is just a more recorded bit of it. So
yeah. I think it's also, it helps sometimes when you like initiate Zoom conversations with people you haven't talked to in a little bit, sometimes it'd be a little awkward at first, even though you're friends with the people. It's just there's just some sort of weird awkwardness. When you're doing the podcast, at least it gives you some sort of activity while you're talking to each other. So it basically gets rid of like any type of awkwardness that was there. So you can have just a normal free flowing conversation that you would have in person. So that's been one really cool thing about doing the podcast and such. I
just basically saying as an icebreaker, start a podcast.
Exactly.
That'd actually be a weird idea. Just have a podcast and just every week you just have some random person just brought on and you just talk.
Yeah, just catch up with them. Just talk.
Yeah, just catch up. Like, or not even catch up, just like a whole new person you don't even know.
Wow. That would be, I would find that a little tough. I'm not even gonna lie. That'd be hard.
Tough. That'd be an interesting idea though. I don't know how the person who hosts it though has to be very interesting. Otherwise some episodes might be a little dry.
Yeah.
But that's getting a little far from this. But I guess like to put some weird structure to our episode 100. I guess let's go with like how we even started. Like I know we have like the origin of the pod episode 69, but like there's like just little things that we wanted to mention, I feel like, on how this whole journey has been since episode 1 and how it all started. Because like we talked about how it started, but we didn't really talk about how it's been and what we've done, like all the little things behind the scenes. I guess this can be like a behind the scenes episode too.
Yeah,
we were talking about it.
If you want to, we could definitely do that. So I guess I'll quickly take the baton real quickly. If you go back to episode 1, which is actually called the Premiere Pod Season Preview, August 8th of 2018, it was right after I got done with my sophomore year internship at a newspaper that's nearby where I lived. And I remember I always I had this back in my mind. I wanted to start a podcast. Literally I wrote it down on a piece of paper that I'm going to start a podcast. And I think the Premiere Pod just kind of fell, like it was a name I had just come up with. And I was like, okay, this will work. And I literally recorded the first episode in this room. I used to have a futon here. It's not here anymore, but I sat on my futon, propped the laptop up on a little desk thing and just used the laptop microphone and used, what did I use? Audacity. Yeah, I think I used Audacity, hit record and just started the show from there. And it's pretty cool because it started from this episode. And then from that episode, Tyler was like, okay, I'm interested. If you're looking for a co-host. I was like, yeah, let's go for it. And then episode 2, we recorded it in our Reed Hall study room. And if you didn't know, there was like a big fan in the study room. So if you go back and listen to that episode, quality is really bad because we're still using the laptop audio, but we're also getting the big fan noise from this gigantic fan that just wouldn't turn off while we were recording. So all you're hearing is like, boom. You're just hitting like loud echoing sounds. But that was the cool thing. And then eventually we kind of figured out, as we said in the origin pod, about the actual legitimate, what would you call it? Studio
recording
room.
Booth.
Yeah, recording booth. But I mean, back then I just we didn't really know what we were doing. We were just kind of hitting record and seeing what happens. And our structure of our episodes, I literally had a notepad and I would handwrite the outline. And before, I would send a picture of the outline to Tyler maybe a couple hours or a day before. Hopefully, like if I was on my ball, like if I was on my game, I'd send it maybe a day before we recorded, and he'll look at it and be like, yeah, I think that's legit. And we'll just kind of go from there. So we were literally handwriting our outline on a notepad with like some pen and paper. And just kind of going from there. I wish I had, I believe I have the notepad somewhere, but it's somewhere in some bins that I need to go through and look back. But, it's just, that's kind of what our show was. It was just like write it down on a notepad and then hit record and see what happens, basically.
It was not the most efficient thing. And also since I was a person that was in like a technology-esque major, I probably should have brought up Google Drive.
I know that would have been a lifesaver.
Yeah, for like my own projects with other groups and things like that. And I didn't even ever think to connect it. It's like, oh yeah, I can use Google Drive and then we can share a file that we can just type on together. And we didn't do that until like episode 36.
Yeah,
because
our final episode.
That was our first episode we had where we have a digital record of our outline. Like,
Is there going to be like a museum? It's like there's going to be like some lost records. Like we just don't know what they plan on from episode 1 to 35. It's just lost.
they just guessed. But that's literally how it was. And then, as I just was saying, like we would record in this recording booth in our student center at UGA. Like that was where we recorded. We moved from our dorm to the student center, but even then, we would never have a guaranteed spot in there. It was very much like a luxury right now to record anytime we want, just at home. But back in the days, we would have to just kind of go in there and just pray that there was an open, the booth was open. Because
exactly,
you can reserve that booth for 2 hours at a time. But if someone's in there already, like you just got to wait for them.
Yeah, I remember there was a lot of times when we would get in there and we would be like, I remember our initial recording time, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday. We picked Tuesday because we were like, okay, all the game weeks, have ended, because usually there's some Monday games being played. And we were like, okay, let's try to go for Tuesday. And then I think your schedule kind of got a little conflicted because you had like the project class or something like that. And so you had some sort of, you had to meet with, you had classwork to take care of. So I was like, okay, we got to move it around. So we had Wednesday, and I remember we tried to get in on Wednesday, but a lot of times it would kind of be a thing where there should be somebody there and he would just take up the entire time. And it was only open, I think, up until 8 or 9 p.m. So basically, if you're out of time, you're out of time. And, we'd have to move back our recording slot to Thursday, and it would just make things a lot more crazier than it had to be, because we didn't have the luxury of having the control of the time. Our time was basically controlled by someone else at that sense.
And even then, when you're in that recording booth, you never know who was in it before. It would fiddle with all the electronic, all the equipment. It's like, this mic doesn't work today. It's like, this thing doesn't work today. Or like, the software is down today. You never know. There's so many variables that just would always. It's like elf on a shelf, except if it was every week.
Exactly.
For this one booth. And you never know who was in there before. It could be people who go there regularly to record music, or it could be just a bunch of randos there just record something for a project for school, and then like no one knows what they're doing, or just be people there just chilling. Like you never know what's going on in there. And then we're the few regulars that would try to get that booth, and people that would work at the student center like knew us eventually. They'd be like, oh yeah, you're back for this week's episode. But eventually, there would always be times when we'd have to like wait an hour or two for the next opening slot. So we'd go across the street to the dining hall, eat for like 30 minutes, come back, and then find out someone else took our spot in line because we left. Like those little things. And it's like, well, I guess we got to push the episode.
I just remember like that was our first access to legit mics, but I remember the whole unplugging and plugging thing, because you actually have one of the same audio interface we were using. I think it'll probably get cropped out in the video, but it's this little red box and it has the XLR cables in it, and we didn't really know what we were doing. And even the people that assigned the room to people, they didn't even know what they were doing. So when we would ask for help, they were like, I just literally, one person was like, I just kind of unplug stuff and plug it back in and it'll just work. So we were like, okay. So that was literally our strategy. If something wasn't working correctly, we would just unplug it, plug it back in and press some buttons, and hopefully it just magically works.
We would literally do the GameCube like cartridge, like
blow on the cable.
You rip out the cable from the like audio amp, and then you just like blow into it, just like, and then just like slot it back in and pray it works. And sometimes I don't know if it's just blind luck, but it sometimes works. But that's literally how kind of little knowledge we had about all this. And now here we are. I bought that exact one for home, and I actually know how to use it now. Yeah, that definitely was not the way to fix it, but like all these little things also taught us how to use all this equipment, all this technology, and also kind of taught us what works and what sounds good and what we wanted for our podcast. Because before we didn't really have that many choices. We got lucky with the student center having some really good equipment, but it was only those mics, only those, sound systems and applications and software on the computer that we used. It was only those things, and we had to learn how to use those things specifically. But
I remember back then too, when we would record the studio recording, or the recording booth had a Mac like iMac in there, and that was what everything was hooked up to. So us being noobs, we decided to use GarageBand because we like, all right, like GarageBand seems like the simplest solution, because we were trying to use Audacity, but I think Audacity wasn't downloaded on that Mac, and they couldn't download it because of some admin stuff. Obviously everyone knows, like, there's some admin stuff you just can't get around. So it was either use GarageBand or Audition. And at that point, Audition just looked too overwhelming. Like, even at that point, I didn't even know how to use Photoshop. I knew a little bit about Premiere Pro, but I didn't even know how to use any of the Adobe products. Like, I was a complete noob on all of that stuff. And GarageBand was there, and GarageBand, in its simplest term, it was pretty easy to understand and use. But like Tyler said, we only had 2 hours in there. So basically, we had to make sure we record in that hour slot, and it gave us another hour to try to fiddle with stuff and hopefully get everything edited down, and we can export it and get out of there before we get kicked out. Because I only had a Windows laptop. We both had Windows laptops at that time, so we couldn't even transport and try to fiddle with the audio files on our own personal computers because it wouldn't work. So we were really crunched with time. So we had to make things like very quick, a lot of edits very quick. We couldn't take time with the edits or anything.
Mm-hmm. Like, that's crazy to think about now, where we very much take our time these days with the editing, making sure we sound good. We don't really cut out anything, really. Like, there's very rare times when we feel like we need to cut something out of an episode. Mm-hmm. Maybe there was a technical issue, or maybe like a weird long pause, or maybe
it's very rare, very rare. Because I remember at that beginning point, we were like cutting out a lot of stuff because we were like, oh, we didn't, especially in the beginning, because they'd be like, oh, we didn't like say this properly, or like didn't pronunciate like the words correctly or something like that.
We got really picky with like how we would pronounce things. It's like we wanted to sound professional at the same time we weren't professional. We're just like college students, and then eventually we just kind of accepted that, and then it made it a lot more natural sounding. Because I feel like when we first started, we had this persona, because when you speak for a podcast is a lot different from any other social interaction you've ever had. Usually you're speaking to a person, or you're speaking to at least someone on the other side of a machine. You're never just talking to yourself, unless you're like schizophrenic. So speaking and kind of finding energy, finding emotion just from your own just inner self, or just from your own points that you're saying, it was something that we had to develop a lot. And also just on top of that, kind of thinking to make sure we had the right filters in our head to not say something too crazy. But I mean, even then, like, we kind of realized over time, it's like, we don't really say anything too crazy anyway. I don't think we have to worry about that. So that really did help. And that's why it kind of sounds more natural in the later episodes, when maybe in like the 50s or 60s. It took a long time, I felt like, at least personally for me, to get used to speaking in front of a mic just to no one.
Yeah, it definitely takes a while, because the first couple episodes, they were definitely pretty regimented and a little stiff with like what we were talking about, like our points and stuff. Because I guess we didn't really know the type of tone we wanted with the podcast still, because we were so new. We were like, okay, we're talking about these topics, so we got to try to act like the pundits that you see on Sky Sports and stuff, that like, that are on top of their game and know everything. But obviously they're former players, so they understand a lot of the intricacies and stuff that maybe us just being people that just watch the game on TV don't see. But I remember I try to at least try to replicate, like, trying to being like on TV and being very structured and try to get like the right stuff down. And we kind of did that for a lot of season one, and then eventually we just kind of realized, like, that's not really our style of how we normally talk about this stuff. So let's just kind of transition to how we normally talk. And it really, I feel like it's helped the show a lot when it comes to just the overall sound and the way it feels, to be honest.
Because like the whole first season, after we looked at it retrospectively, it's just like we just kind of reviewed games.
Yeah.
And
we're talking about like games that we didn't even watch sometimes.
Yeah. It would be like, you watch this Burnley versus Southampton game? It's like, no. It's like, well, it is a game from the week, so
Burnley won 1-0.
Yeah, Burnley won 1-0. It's like Chris Wood scored this kind of goal, and then we just kind of had to like BS our way through it. It's just like, all right, that's not really our style. It's not really too genuine either. It's like, and also after a certain point, it's like, there's not really that many people that want to listen to that. It's like if they wanted to listen to a play-by-play recap or something, they just go on YouTube and just watch the actual highlights or watch the game itself. So eventually what I want to think, it's like people are listening to our pod just to hear like what we think. It's like we shouldn't really go too objective into just what happened in the game. We should kind of focus more on what we thought about a certain thing that happened in the game, or maybe something that happened outside of the pitch. And then eventually that's when it got a little better for us, because instead of us trying to talk about things we didn't know, we just only talked about things we had opinions on. And that really helped us also be more natural, because then we didn't have to be like, oh yeah, Conte had a very good positioning on the field because of his intellectual like positioning and zonal marking. It's like we didn't know what we were talking about at certain points. We just kind of made stuff
up. I still think like even when we do bring those topics up, like certain like tactics and stuff, it's because we noticed them and we saw them. You know, it's not like someone else said it and we're trying to replicate it. It's like, no, we saw what we saw. You know, it's like if we saw somebody just walking around when there's a goal, like we're going to point that out because we're like, why is this dude just walking around when they need to be playing, you know, stuff like that. So we've gotten a lot better at just when we do talk about certain things, because we have the opinion on them, like we pick that out, you know, type stuff. So
it was a weird transition, because that also made it so that we had less things prepared, because it just made it forced us to kind of speak more from our heads and just kind of speak about our own opinions. And that really did help, because if you look at our rundown these days, we might have like 10 or 15 points, but they're very short. It's like 6 words per line. It's like, you know, last week we talked about Mino Raiola, and we literally just had his name and Pogba in one line, basically. And it's like, all right, there we go. And then we talked about that for like 10 minutes. So it's just like those things that kind of like activate ideas or kind of spark ideas in our heads to know what to talk about. That's kind of how we structure it these days. So sometimes it sounds a little weird, but that's just because it's just how we naturally speak now.
And I think it also helps us. It helps me out too. So because sometimes when I see a whole entire script in front of me, almost like word for word what I'm supposed to read, sometimes I get a little too. I get not choked up, but I feel a little nervous, because I'm like, okay, I already have the script in front of me. I can't deviate away from that. But when I have just certain bullet points of Pogba, Raiola, or Zlatan, or Mourinho defensive, something like that, then I can just kind of speak freely and in a flowing way that I like to talk when I talk about soccer and such. And when we kind of transition to doing more of that style, it helped. It really did help. And also, like Tyler mentioned, when we started talking about stuff that we really did care about, it showed. I think our quality and just the overall show itself just got better. But I guess not to harp on that point too much, I wanted to kind of bring back a little bit of like just throwbacks of looking at some of our older episodes, because we had a little bit of structure, semi-structure going into. We just wanted to kind of look back at some of the little milestones and such. But obviously we mentioned the editing, or, you know, obviously the editing and getting that recording booth. But one of the coolest ones I remember, it was not disheartening, but I just remember a lot of season 1. This happens with anything you're trying to start from the ground up, is, you know, we didn't really see a lot of listeners and such. We saw a little bit in the beginning, because I think that's when you get like a lot of family and friends, you know, clicking on the show and be like, yeah, this is awesome. And then after that initial boost, you kind of realize you get a little bit of a very sharp plateau of like, okay, you know, you go through a bunch of episodes without people really clicking on it. And I remember a lot of season 1 was kind of like that. We just kind of didn't really go anywhere. It was just kind of stay stagnant almost. And, you know, it was not the best thing to see, obviously, because you want to see your show grow. But I think it was, you know, now seeing it where, you know, we're seeing little growth here and there, and we're seeing that people are listening each and every episode a couple of times. I think it kind of makes the journey worth it in a sense, because it was slow and steady growth. It wasn't all of a sudden, boom, we're here, we get this big uptick of people, and then, you know, it just kind of falls away. It was slow and steady, kind of wins the race. Like the what's that story? It's like the turtle and the bunny.
Turtle and the hare.
Yeah, it's like
tortoise
slow
and the hare.
Yeah, slow and steady wins the race. And I think slowly how we've seen the show grow in terms of hitting our first mark of like 100 downloads and then 1,000 downloads. It's been very, very cool to see that throughout season 1. And then as we progress through season 2 and then season 3.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like the thing that's really helped us in particular is just like we never had, to be completely honest, our expectations for where the podcast was going to go was never really too high. It's just something we just had in the back of our heads. It's just something we always had to do for fun. Mm-hmm. And we never thought it's like, all right, if we don't get 1 million listeners, if we don't get, 100,000 subs or followers, it's going to be a failure. Like we never thought about anything like that. We never had any threshold where it's like, it will be a failure if we don't hit X, Y, and Z. It's always been like whatever we get for it is like, that's what we get. It's like, we'll go as far as how far we see that it goes. Like if it goes to a certain point, we'll reach it, or like we'll, match it. If we see like a big opportunity for it, then like, we'll go for it. We'll never think it's like, we'll never keep it at a certain point where it's like, oh, it'll only be this, it'll only be that. It'll just, we always thought of it as something where it's like, we'll just see how far we can take it.
No, I think that's a good mindset, because I remember we kind of had the same thing, because it wasn't, we didn't even make, I think the first social media profile we made was a Twitter, and we didn't even make that until I feel like midway through season 1. It wasn't even at the beginning of season 1 I literally made it midway through season 1. And that's, if this was a full on, because it kind of goes back to the point, we didn't really know what we were doing in the beginning. We were just kind of like, okay, we had this idea, let's see where it goes. And then as we slowly started picking up some momentum, we were like, okay, let's add this and then this and then this, but it was slowly. And I think that's kind of like a good thing to know when you start any type of project. Is just don't overwhelm yourself with like everything or trying to learn everything before you start. Just kind of start. And then as you see with us, like eventually you'll start learning more and more, but that takes time. It's like, you can't expect to be Harry Kane scoring, 20 goals a season if you've never played in the Premier League. Like, no, you have to learn the baby steps of learning how to play the sport. And then you start building on that. And then you can become, I don't know, you can see what happens. But I think that's an important lesson to learn there, is just don't overwhelm yourself with trying to learn all the techniques. Just, start somewhere and then go from there, I would say.
Because like fundamentally too, even when we still do these podcasts, at least how I think about it is it's just me and Yash speaking. You can also, if you're say someone huge like, Joe Rogan or something like that, and you have an audience of like millions of people, it's kind of like as if you're doing a public speech in front of like a huge auditorium. And then that's how many people are there to listen. But for us, like even we have like a small audience now. It's like for us, we're speaking to, tens of people or like maybe 100 people. And it could be a little intimidating, but like we never really even think about it like that. Like I didn't really even think about that thought until just now. I was like, oh yeah.
Kind of same thing.
Like speaking to people and whatever we say, like they'll catch on. And also it's just like all those little things, like all those little public speaking fears, it kind of just goes away, because like there's this little box we're in, and it just, they don't really see us, we don't see them. It's just it's for whoever wants it.
Exactly. And I think one of the cool things, if you kind of go back, please, talking about public speaking, at least, I think both of the way we just talk on the podcast has gotten a lot better. It's gotten like exponentially better than the first episode we did together. It just, the words flow a lot better. We kind of know the cadence of when to talk, how to talk, when to take pauses and such. It's not like we're trying to cram 500 bits of information all in one breath. We take our time with doing everything, and that comes with time. If you've never started a podcast and you start a podcast, you can't expect to be the best speaker of all time. It comes with time, and we're not the best at it, at speaking on podcasts and such, but we've slowly gotten better to a point where we're doing pretty good. But that all comes with time. But I wanted to mention really quickly, I guess, so another milestone is in season 1, we did have a guest, which was our buddy Nathan. We actually had him on as a guest in the season 3 as well for the Relegation Zone pod. So obviously check that episode out too if you want to hear his thoughts and opinions. Always a fun one to have on. But I remember our first official guest was a season 2, episode 45, when we had Henry Bushnell, Yahoo Sports soccer writer for Yahoo Sports. Unfortunately, Tyler couldn't make that episode.
I was so bummed. I was like, we have our first guest that was someone that we didn't really know. It was just someone who just reached out to an analyst who worked for Yahoo Sports. And like before, we even had, Jack, one of our other friends, like on the podcast, but it was just other journalism students that really were kind of just getting away.
They were just friends of friends, basically.
Yeah. And like just fans of the just Premier League and just kind of having an outlet just to like speak on certain things. But this is like the first milestone, officially. And I forgot why I was out. It was either, I think it might have been like a test or something, or I don't know. I'm just blanking now.
Yeah. No, I just remember that one was a cool episode. Obviously, Tyler couldn't make it, but I remember the first official one we did, where we had a guest with both me and Tyler, and the guest was episode 52, November 21st, 2019, which was actually the day. It was very weird in season 2. We somehow always recorded an episode when a manager was getting sacked. And oddly enough, when we're recording this one, Big Sam is appointed for West Brom, and Slaven Bilic actually got sacked. So I guess this curse that we somehow have of whenever we record, a manager gets sacked. But in that season, it was crazy. And that was the day that Mauricio Pochettino actually got sacked, and then Mourinho was appointed the Tottenham manager. And we had Eric Krakauer from BN Sports come on, and he was very nice. He was super awesome, and it was just really cool to kind of have someone like that on the podcast that could really break down and, I guess, analyze the move of Mourinho coming to Tottenham and stuff. And it was a super fun episode. And I remember just thinking, I was like, dang, this is pretty cool to have someone like this come on the show and stuff. And it was just really cool to think back on, to have something like that happen.
And even to kind of jump on top of that, like having Kevin Egan as well and Phil Shane, these big commentators and analysts, we did not think we were going to have people like that on our podcast, especially people like our friends, listeners of the podcast also have heard.
Well-respected people in the soccer media community.
We had people like our friends just texting us like, how the heck did you get this guy on the podcast? We're like, I don't know. We just asked. Like literally people would ask us is like, what steps did you take? What things did you do? It's like, Yash literally told me, I asked Yash, I was like, how the heck did you get this guy? And then Yash would just say, I just emailed him, sent him an email. And then he just said yes.
I was like, wow, this is really cool. But I think for me, I didn't really wanted to start reaching out until we crossed, like, I guess in my head, a certain threshold. Because I feel like if we reached out in the beginning of season 1, when we had maybe 4 episodes, I feel like it'd just be really weird, because we'd be like, there would be kind of no, foundation of work. But I felt like after season 1, we had built up 36 episodes. Then when we got into season 2, we were like, okay, we've been doing this for a little bit. And I feel we're both pretty comfortable talking to each other. So I feel like it wouldn't have been a too big of a stretch to add a guest on to kind of come on and, offer their opinions and stuff. And I, for me, at least, I felt like once we kind of reached a certain number of episodes, I was like, okay, I think we can see what happens if we start reaching out and such, and see what happens.
Those are very like formal episodes too, in my opinion, because Yash and I, those are ones that we actually plan for as much as we can, because we're very grateful just to have someone just like take time out of their day, like out after work, just to speak to like just us two about random questions about them or about anything related to soccer. Because, every once in a while, like say for Eric Krakauer, for example, he wasn't primarily like a Premier League analyst. He's very much covered like La Liga and other leagues. And he was very big into the Portuguese players, so he knew a lot about those. So like kind of bringing out the more about those guests that we brought on was something we kind of really thought about. And we even brought other people besides just official, analysts and voices.
Like Premier League pundits and stuff.
Yeah, Premier League pundits and just voices that everyone just kind of remembers or knows. But we even brought like some friends up still throughout all this, like, Cho, the armchair manager. Of course, Yash and Nathan with the Relegation Zone pod. Also give that a listen to. It's like our good friends over there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, with the episodes of the guests, especially when we have, some of those people that are more well renowned, we really do take our time and research those because, we want to make sure we're offering something unique to the table in terms of the questions we ask and sort of the insight that that we want to get from them, from like their experiences and such, because we don't want to run the risk of not being prepared and asking the same 5 questions that they always tend to get asked whenever they're on a podcast or on a written article or anything like that. So those are interesting. I do on those episodes, I'm not gonna lie, I do get like that kind of that nervous thing where you're just like, okay, we got this. And then like, when you have to, because it's very interesting because obviously with technology, no matter how good your tech is, sometimes it will just fail. It's happened to everyone. That's always been my biggest fears when we have guests. I just want the tech to not fail. That's probably my biggest worry out of anything. I'm like, just everything runs smoothly, please. Let's just make sure the episode goes smoothly, and then we'll go from there. And for the most part, that's been true. We've had a couple instances where we almost where things have looked like they've gone a little bit bad, but we've had I just remember the episode with Kevin Egan. He was so grateful that it seemed like the audio had failed initially, but he was able to get back on the Zoom, the Zencaster link, and he was able to upload the file and then send it back to us. And, that was awesome for him to do that. And I just remember whenever there have been certain technical fails, like the guests have just been super nice and super gracious about it. And, that means a lot because it's like, okay, it's just really cool to see that for sure.
Mm-hmm. And then I remember specifically one time of like Lizzie, at the very end of the podcast, Yosh's computer just died.
Yeah, that's when I was like, okay, I got to get a new laptop. I got to get a new computer.
40 minutes in, and then all of a sudden he just disappears, and she's like, what happened? And then I was like, I don't know. Yosh texts me, he's like, my computer crapped out. So he's just keep talking. I'm like, okay.
That was
I'll be back. Like, all right.
That was crazy that the Zencaster somehow kept the recording files from the initial 40 minutes of recording and such. That was wild.
Mm-hmm. Like, we have to thank Zencaster a lot for this too, because it's like a free platform that we've used since the beginning. And without it, I don't think we would have had a podcast.
Because I think our other option would have been Zoom. But the cool thing about Zencaster, we've talked about it before, is that it lets you download 2 individual audio tracks, and that way you can get better quality in terms of editing and such. But yeah, if we didn't have this, we'd probably have to use Zoom or something like that. And Skype or Zoom, and sometimes especially for Skype, at least, like there's a lot of audio failures and call drops and stuff like that. So we are very gracious that we were able to find a platform that was free and that we were able to use to continue working on the podcast and such.
Yeah. And even like just like quickly go back to like equipment that we've done, like Yash and I, now since we have the luxury of being remote, since if you were to go back to like our episodes, you can see the progression of how we've kind of grown. And I graduated from UGA a year before Yash, and then eventually Yash graduated as well. Mm-hmm. And then it even shows Yash getting his first job straight out of UGA. And like, because of the podcast, it kind of keeps like a documentary of our lives too, which is kind of cool to see. Because once I graduated, it forced us to had to record remotely, because I couldn't go back to Athens, which was an hour and a half or an hour 15 minutes from my house at home, or like where I live at home. Yeah. And then from work, I work in like Midtown Atlanta, and that's like a 3-hour drive. So there was no way I was going to be able to make it to Athens every single week. So it forced us to do remote recordings. And then even at first, when we first started doing that, we didn't have mics at home. We didn't have those studio mics.
I was literally I'm not using this mic I'm using this mic right now, the one this little microphone, but I was literally using my headphone microphone from these headphones as my main mic.
Yeah, same. I even had like a pair of like Bose, like noise canceling headphones, and they had mics on them, and I used those for the very beginning of season 2.
Yeah.
So like the quality dropped a little bit, but then eventually I bought like a Blue Snowball, which is one I'd recommend for a lot of people to get if they're trying to start to get into a podcast or streaming or anything like that. And then Yash, which one did you get?
I actually got an Audio Technica ATR. Actually, let me read it right now. ATR 2100. It's a USB microphone, but it also has an XLR cable. So eventually I need to get the little red I'm forgetting, amp for it. And if I do that, I don't necessarily have to upgrade my microphone right away. I can still use this one because it has the cable and such. And this was like only like $60-$70, but my gosh, like when you go from these microphones to an actual standalone microphone, it's amazing how much better the audio sounds.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to use too. Like I upgraded from my Blue Snowball to the the Shure SM7B. This is a like finisher microphone in my opinion. It's just one I wanted to splash on because I wanted to have a mic where it was a lot easier to use, a lot easier for editing purposes, and also, you know, if the equipment's better, then it'll be faster to kind of turn episodes around. And this is one that I think I can use for like years and years. So it's more of an investment. But it's just like those little things, they all didn't come within like a year. But like we're 2.5 years in now, and this is like my 5th or 6th mic at this point, if you include, you know, the laptop that we recorded on, the recording booth mics that we used, the headphones that we used as mics. Like this is like 5th or 6th like sound recording device that I've used personally for this one podcast. So it definitely takes time, and it won't happen all at once, and you'll know what to pick and choose eventually. Yeah. So yeah, it's just like all those little things.
Yeah. Even like with this mic, I used to use like the little stand that came with it. It was like, I would be like hunched over like this. And then eventually I bought this little this little raiser of this stand. That way it will raise the microphone kind of up to this level in my mouth. So I'm not like hunched over like this trying to talk on the microphone. So, and I remember you used to use the little stand and just stack it up on books. And then you finally got like a little audio arm, like a little boom arm or whatever.
Yeah, I've got like this little desk arm so I can swing it around. I don't have to stack books on top of my mic stand anymore.
Exactly. So, you know, we kind of found back then we would find like a lot of solutions to kind of avoid spending the money because we were still college students and everything, because we were like, yeah, I don't know if I have like that much money to splash on that thing right now. So let's just find a way to make this work. And, you know, you just kind of get creative and try to find different ways to make things work. Because I remember in the beginning of, just kind of backtracking a little bit, but beginning of season 1, we actually shared a microphone that was pretty much like this. And we just like shared it. We'd be like, I'd be on this end, he'd be on this end, and we'd be talking like that.
Yeah, we'd literally lean into one microphone whenever we spoke, and then whenever the other person wasn't speaking, would lean back, and then we'd take turns leaning into one microphone to speak. So we've come a long way. It's everyone starts somewhere different. We got really lucky, also, I'd say, with just UJ having
audio
equipment ready to go, and then also for YouTube to teach us how to use the equipment and Google. But a lot of stuff we kind of just had to figure out. And I feel like this is more like profound point to kind of jump on, but like a lot of this stuff, I feel like even helped Yash land that first job too, because there's something you can have on the resume. And also for me at work, I don't even work in journalism or anything related to sports, but it's something that I was able to mention to kind of be different from everyone else. It's like, what do you do? It's like, oh, I have a podcast. So literally people at work are like, how's your podcast doing? Like, you're just like, oh, you're the podcast guy. And it's really cool to kind of have something of your own to say as like your thing you do outside of work, or as a way to really show that it's like your own personal project.
Yeah, I agree. I think the cool thing is that because of the podcast, I kind of got into graphic design and stuff, because I literally, my first graphic design on Photoshop was just an ad to listen to the podcast. It was just like a Paul Pogba infographic, and then it had the Premiere Pod on the end. And I literally got started using Photoshop trying to make graphics for the show. And the beginning ones obviously look kind of bad now looking back at it, but slowly it kind of made me want to learn more about graphic design. And that kind of helped showcase my work to employers and such. And it really helped me land my job, because I was like, okay, I know how to use Photoshop correctly, and I know how to do it. And in a lot of ways, if I didn't have the podcast, or if we didn't have the podcast, I don't know if, you know, I would have had that really strong urge to learn some of these programs and stuff that I know now.
And heck, we always joke, it's like, what if the podcast gets big this can just be our job. Like that's
Exactly.
what we're saying too. So, that'd be a nice to have, but it's always something that we'll always have as long as we can, because as long as we keep this train going, it's very much just up to us to how long this podcast goes, because now we're both working. We started both as students in the same university, just still trying to get our degrees, and now we're both graduated, we're both working, and it's very much up to us to, based on wherever our careers push us or wherever life pushes us, to make sure we just keep it going. And at least for me and Yash, like whenever we talk about it, it's always like as if it's going to go for a while. And we joked, it's like it took us 2.5 years to get to episode 100, which means to get to say episode 1000, it would take another 25 years if the trajectory is the same.
Dang.
So I'd be like 40s or 50s at that point.
Yeah, I'd really be in my 40s.
That'd be that's something to think about. But I mean, I don't know how at this point, I don't know how long it'll be, but for now, it's just looking like it's a pretty good deal, that it's just something that's different in our lives, and just to kind of keep us going. But this is gonna get a little too sentimental if I keep going that deep. But I guess like a very general one. Yeah, it's just like, if we go back and just review every single episode, that could take forever. Is there any like thing that you think was very prolific that you can just remember from just every single episode? Like, I would say one question I think people have asked me is like, how do you keep, like, what's like the hardest thing about the podcast? And for me, I always say it's never like the content, trying to make the content or like think about points. It's like very little things, like what will be the title of the episode? True. That's something that dupes us every single week.
It's hard.
After every episode, it's always like, what is the title?
It's hard because we try our best to kind of keep the titles a little unique and a little kind of something that we would talk about, like a meme or a joke that makes sense to us, and also kind of encapsulates what's going on in the soccer world. So it's a little tough, but it definitely kind of challenges us to kind of think outside the box a little bit, to kind of find the right title, I would say. Because
I feel like if that's our biggest issue, then I feel like that's a good thing. Because then, like, as those things we were mentioning, is we're not really struggling too much about finding what to talk about, or trying to use, or trying to figure out what technology or equipment to use. It's like, if now the hardest problems are like these kind of things, it's like, all right, then looks like it makes it easier for us to keep going every single week, because it makes it a lot more streamlined, a lot more of a routine for us now.
Exactly.
But even then, like, there's so many like intricacies that you can think about, even in those little things, like say a title, because like certain titles get picked up by certain algorithms. If something's trending, like say if Cavani scored a goal, then he's going to be trending on Google. And then if our podcast title has Cavani in it, then it'll pop up randomly for more people.
Yeah.
But even then, like, our goal is not really, to get to jump on trends or anything like that. It's just to talk about whatever we wanted. So that's also like just certain things a lot of people have mentioned, is like, there's a lot of little things we could do to get big. But for us, we always, as like we mentioned in this one episode, it's just, we just want to talk about whatever we want to talk about, not be forced into anything too.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cool things about it. We just kind of talk about the topics we talk about, and if it's something that's trending, then for the most part, we do kind of go with the main headlines and stuff. But there are certain times when it's whether it's Tyler. Obviously, Tyler's a big Liverpool fan. I'm a big Manchester United fan. If there's like a burning thing that we see that within our club that we need to talk about, I know I've gone on crazy rants and stuff about it. We'll just talk about it because it's like, that's what we're passionate about, and that's what we want to talk about,
And then even like on Twitter, when like a fan reaches out with one sentence of like a point, like, or a friend texts us about one thing, like Sungmin today was just roasting me during the Liverpool Tottenham game, saying he's like, oh, Tottenham's got this, and then when it was 2-1, I was like, all right. Like, little things like that. It really does make a big difference whenever anyone just reaches out with just like one bullet point, or even just one thing to talk about, because then we use that and just talk about it on the podcast. Because if people are reaching out to us about it, then we'll talk about it. And we also use this platform to kind of generate, like as Yash said, like, ideas that we just find interesting. So it's or like even new hobbies, like how Yash started, doing graphic design. But as episode 100, I always thought there needs to be something big we should do. And we were stuck. We just didn't really know what else to do. Like we didn't know what ideas to have, because at this point, there's a lot of people who have done, things like what we're doing now, like a podcast or like a series. And once they get to a certain point, it's really dependent on how big the audience is or how big they want to do something crazy. Like if they're rich, then they can, do like a giveaway, or if had like a crazy audience, they can go on tour.
Yeah.
For us, it's like, we don't know. It's like, it's just very much up to us to kind of figure it out. And there's like little quirky ideas I had where it's like, one of the little funny things that we always joke about is like, we never made a profit on this podcast. It's always been something that is always out of our pocket, just something we've done for free.
Yeah.
Something that, we never really saw as a business. And then I was like, as a joke, I was like, maybe for episode 100 or something like that, we can make our first piece of merch, like one t-shirt, and we sell it for like a $1 profit. And then we say we made a profit. Or like maybe, I don't know, if anyone wants to sponsor us, just donate $1. It's like, we can finally say we made a profit for episode 100. I don't know. If anyone has any ideas for things we could do, like, reach out, let us know, because even I had, like my friend who was a listener of the podcast, Sungman, he joked, he's like, if you made a t-shirt, I might buy it. just have, because that'd be pretty fun to make that.
Yeah, if you guys want to see any type of like merch or anything like that, just let us know, and we'll see what we can do to try to make things work. But obviously, we want to know if you guys are interested, because that's the main thing.
Mm-hmm. We don't really think about this, of course, as a big business or anything we're going to make money from. It's just like, that's just something we've always thought about. It's like, I wonder how people do make money from podcasting, because unless you're huge, like Joe Rogan, have like those contracts, or maybe you're even Peter Crouch podcast is still pretty big. You can, list all these other kind of podcasts like Star Talk from Neil deGrasse Tyson, or Tiny Meat Gang from Cody Ko and Noel. Like you can list all these, and they have like sponsors, things like that. But you don't really know too much about the smaller ones like us. So we kind of just do it for free still. It's just everyone's always wondering about, at least for me, it's just like, do you guys get any perks or anything? It's like, no, we just do it for fun. It's like how we've always thought about it. Like we don't really like seek it. We don't think on the weekends is like, you know what, we gotta go do this. Like we'll try it, but like if nothing works out, it's like at least we tried. It's just something. It's just what it is. And then right now we just continue doing what we do.
Exactly. It's like like one of Tyler's like best phrases on the show is like, you never know. So,
you never know.
Yeah,
one of our listeners is like, you know what? I got you.
Exactly. You never know. You never know what's going to happen. But I mean, I think Tyler did a pretty good job of just kind of wrapping up, episode 100 for us. I think he did a pretty good job of just putting a bow on this pretty, I guess like out of our ordinary, like unstructured episodes and such. But, I think he did a really good job on this. I can't really think of any other points or anything else that's on top of my head at this moment, unless Tyler, you got any last opinions or thoughts or anything like that?
Well, for me, I guess is very much similar to what we opened with, which is just a big thank you from me or Yash and me. What's the right grammar?
It's like
that's yeah. I get my head in like season 1, but big thank you to everyone that listens. Just give us any listen, or even share it with a friend, because this is something that we just do for fun, and hopefully everyone who listens to us, maybe it'll help cheer you up for a day, or maybe it'll just be something that can help you connect with another friend, or something just to talk about. We hope that this podcast, if anything, is just good vibes, just for you to, get through a good time. And also, 2020 has also been kind of a rough year, but it's always something that we thought as something just to give someone an intangible boost, and just to like kind of make someone's day. And if that makes at least one person's day besides us, like that's all that we can really ask for. So as long as we got people listening and people that want to, contribute and want to hear us out, we'll keep making the pods as long as we can. So
yeah, I think that was a great way to put it. Like Tyler mentioned, we want to say thank you to everyone, and just the idea that someone was listening to the show and it's made their day just a little bit better. I think that's definitely the coolest thing. Forget about downloads and stuff. That's definitely one of the coolest things that's pretty cool to think about. But yeah, I think what Tyler mentioned is best way to kind of sum up episode 100. It's been a very, very cool and longish journey, but we're excited to keep it going and see what happens from here. I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of different episode from us. Obviously we're not reviewing any of the games or talking about anything in the Premier League, but we felt like it was appropriate for episode 100 to kind of deviate away from our normal structure and such. So hopefully it made a little sense to you guys. So we really do appreciate everyone that has listened to us from day one, or anyone that's picked up the show recently. Everyone is valued here. So thank you so much for listening to us, supporting us, sharing this episode, or anything of that nature. So we appreciate it. And I mean, yeah, that kind of wraps up episode 100, season 3, episode 100 for us. Thank you guys so much for listening. Peace.
Peace.